monetizing digital services since 2004, boosting the entertainment industry by making digital content accessible for everyone. AWG, where innovation meets monetization.
Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, where your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. If you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Bradley P. Jones about his book, Treading the Deep, Inspirational Lessons on Life and Leadership. Bradley P. Jones, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. It's a pleasure, and it was fun just getting to know you a little bit in the pre-interview. Turns out we are like in the same place. You're about, 10 minutes up the road from me here in Utah. We're both south of Salt Lake City. And today we're going to be talking about Brad's book, Treading the Deep, Inspirational Lessons on Life and Leadership. And I also just have to say, before we really dive on in to the nitty-gritty of this conversation, the coincidence of us just happening to be up the road from each other doesn't end there. It turns out that we actually grew up like right next to each other in Oregon long before we ever ended up in Utah. So wild and crazy world, small world, and it's great to connect with you and a pleasure to be with you to have this conversation today. As we get started, I wanted to share Brad's bio with everybody. Bradley P. Jones, Command Sergeant Major, enlisted in the United States Army in 1984 and served until 1988 as a ground control approach radar repairman. Upon completion of his initial enlistment and a break in service, he joined the Utah Army National Guard in 1993. His military awards and decorations include the Bronze Star Medal, Meritorious Service Medal, Army Commendation Medal, Army Achievement Medal, Good Conduct Medal, Armed Forces Reserve Medal, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, Armed Service Component Achievement Medal, and the Master Aviation Crewmember badge. My goodness, you've done a lot and accomplished a lot. His military education includes the Primary, Basic, and Advanced Noncommissioned Officers Course, the United States Army Sergeant's Major Academy Non-Residence Course, and Bradley's civilian career. He now works for the FAA as an Airway Transportation System Specialist in the Service Operations Center of the Salt Lake Air Route Traffic Control Center, and he resides in Lehi, Utah. Again, a pleasure to be with you, Brad. Such a pleasure and such a fun coincidence to find that we have all these points of connection. Anything else you would like to share with me or the audience by way of your background or personal context before we just dive on in?
Really, just that, my hobbies are love hiking, love biking, road biking, mountain biking, family with 6 kids. I'm recently a grandfather for the second time. Love the outdoors of Utah, and I'm sure you're well aware of the great outdoor opportunities back in Oregon. So whenever I get back home, we try to take the kids and go somewhere cool in the Willamette Valley, and then in 2017 and 2018, I rode STP, Seattle to Portland, did that 205-mile bike race with my brother and nephews, and we're planning on doing it again this year with my son and my brother and a couple of his sons, whoever wants to go. So that's kind of a little bit more about what I like to do.
Well, that's so cool. And listeners of the podcast know I also have 6 children. I'm probably not the same race, but I've done a couple of 220-mile bike races as well. So that's something I've enjoyed. Anyways, lots of interesting connections. I think we need to connect outside of this conversation today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and dive on in. Your book, Treading the Deep, Inspirational Lessons on Life and Leadership, was released last year, and you've been doing lots of interviews and talking to people about this. I'm thrilled to be able to unpack some of the contents of it with you today for the audience. Why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about why this book? What inspired you to write this book? Why this book? Why now?
Well, when I was promoted to the position of Command Sergeant Major in my battalion, that's the top enlisted position in the battalion, and you work directly for the battalion commander. And many battalion commanders, as soon as they take over, they put out their leadership guidance. They call it a command philosophy, and so I saw the command philosophy of the last battalion commander that I served with, and it really inspired me. And it was super short, like literally like 5 sentences. You are on the team, stuff like that, little bullet statements. And so one day we just got into a conversation, and he said, I'd really like to see what kind of command philosophy you would come up with. And so, having gone through the Sergeant Major's Academy, I had written that over that 2-year non-resident course, I'd written probably, 8 to 10 10-page papers, 10,000 words a piece, stuff like that. And many of the topics they gave you were, personal choice, write about something that helped you become the leader that you became. And so when I started to look through and consider a command philosophy, I kind of went back and started reading some of those stories that I'd written. And I realized I have quite a body of work here. And so over time, I just started to piece them together. And then I thought, well, I wanted to write about what I was like when I was younger, growing up in Oregon, that whole thing. And so when I finally got signed with Morgan James Publishing, they asked me if I wanted to utilize a editor, and I said absolutely. And so she helped me basically just totally organize everything and weave the storyline through the whole thing. And so when I submitted that final manuscript to her to read and help me with, it was probably 120,000 words at that point. And so that's kind of where the book came from.
Yeah, thank you for that background. And it's great to hear not only the origin story of the book, it's also, I think it's inspiring to hear about how these kind of books percolate up when it maybe wasn't even your plan in the first place to write it. People sometimes they'll make a goal and they say, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to get, whatever concept or idea, I'm going to get it out there to people and disseminate it. But it sounds like this was kind of a happy, happenstance that you just over time had developed a lot of materials and decided this would be worthwhile to people. And I think that's great. And it's also wonderful to be able to learn more from your unique background in military service and your professional life and the lessons that have been learned from all of that. All right. With that as a foundation, let's talk now about some of the experiences that you describe in your book. Were there any that were the most memorable, that stick out to you the most, that you would like to share with the audience?
First and foremost, the book is basically kind of it's a a true American story. You know, I was a young guy, directionless, on a whim, accompanied my best friend down to the recruiting station because he had already joined. And so ended up in a conversation with the recruiters, and have you thought about what you want to do? You know, kind of like that scene in Forrest Gump, you know, and so, you know, and just talking with those guys, and they said, well, you know, why don't you just take a practice ASVAB test? So I did, and I scored really well on it. And they're like, you can pretty much do whatever you want to do. And so, you know, I decided I wanted to be a radar repairman. Well, much of the storyline is the fact that I joined the Army, went to basic, went to school to be a radar repairman, was in school for a year, and got stationed in Arizona, never touched a radar. Was asked to do a completely different job in the Test and Evaluations Command. And you know, we were the part of the electronic proving ground, which is, you know, back then we were testing night vision goggles, and UAVs were brand new and being tested. And then I was on a team that tested basically the genesis of GPS. And so all that stuff was being field tested back then. So I never got to work on a radar. Got out, came here to Utah after serving a mission, and joined the Utah National Guard, and then started working on Apache helicopters. And did that, loved that. But always kind of felt like, you know, I always wanted to work on radars. That was the whole purpose of me joining. And so ended up getting a position with the FAA. Thought I was going to work on radars. Nope. They're like, we want you to work in the Air Traffic Control Center. So here I am 20 years into my FAA career, never touched a radar. And so, you know, much of the story is about the fact that just basically kind of, you know, picking yourself up and continuing to move forward despite, you know, life throwing you some curveballs. And it definitely threw me, you know, some major curveballs. I mean, my first wife passed away suddenly in 2003, completely unexpected, and absolutely shocking experience. I had my, you know, 3 young children, remarried, and added a daughter who's wonderful, and then we had 2 more kids of our own. So I've got kind of the older, the middle, and the younger. And but you know, in the book I talk about several experiences, including, you know, the sudden death of my wife, as kind of a backdrop for, like I said, you know, life's going to throw you some curveballs, and you know, the most important thing is to just, you know, pick yourself up and keep moving forward, because, you know, good things will come. And that's one of the things that I always talk to my soldiers about was, you know, do you honestly think that when I was in your position, I expected that I would be in my position now? You know, absolutely not. And so I talk about some of the early leaders I had, and some of the fellow soldiers that had a huge impact on my life, and still continue to have an impact on my life. And so, you know, if they like a good, you know, down home American story, you know, this book will appeal to them on many levels.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe we can talk more about some of those early leaders that have influenced you. You already mentioned a military example, but perhaps even going earlier in your life. What were some of those that started to shape your perspective and your framework around leadership, and has influenced the way you've led people during your career in life?
Monetizing digital services since 2004. Boosting the entertainment industry by making digital content accessible for everyone. AWG, where innovation meets monetization.
Well, I mean, you know, first and foremost, there was a whole section written about my childhood and how I ended up living with my grandparents. My parents divorced when I was young in grade school, and so my dad really wasn't a part of my day-to-day life. And then I ended up in my junior and senior year of high school living with my grandfather or my grandparents. And my grandfather had a huge impact on me. Still to this day, I hear his voice in my head. And then, going into the military, I mean, that's obviously it's a very shocking experience for most people. And then those early leaders, I talk about, the invaluable service that our drill sergeants do for, our sons and daughters in helping them, jolting them into adulthood and, and being responsible and in some very uncomfortable ways at times. And so if the reader's never been in the military or ever associated with the military, this book will speak to them, because it is a roller coaster ride through basic. I mean, most of I'm well over 100 reviews on both Amazon and Goodreads and Barnes and Noble. And the comment I get the most is that they feel like they're with me on the ride. And, I have to kudos to my editor, because she helped me to pull the reader in to my level, to seeing things like they're standing right beside me. And so, the early leader I had, I talk about him, his name's Jack. And he was the father figure that I kind of never had. And just had a tremendous impact on the leader I became, because I always measured every leader after that against Jack. And then I had a sergeant major back then that I got to know pretty well. And, the guy had 2 tours in Vietnam, ran a POW camp in Vietnam. Just an amazing, amazing story. And I got to know him on a personal basis. And I was never comfortable when I was around him. I was always, sitting up straight, on my seat and back all straight. And so, but he had a huge impact on me. And so, then there are the stories in the book about the dumb things that I did as a young soldier. I'm sure that many readers who had experience in the military will be able to relate to those. And so I wrote about them. I drove a 5-ton truck clear across the base in Arizona, and never took the emergency brake off the trailer I was towing, and pulled into the motor pool, and this massive cloud of white smoke just, as I stopped, it just continued on and went past the cab of the truck. And I just hopped out of the truck and just looked at the ground. Oh my gosh. And those emergency brakes on that trailer were red hot, and just some very embarrassing things that happened that I now laugh about. But they were character builders for me. And so, those are the stories that, as when I became a sergeant major, that soldiers would come up to me and say, hey, Sergeant Major, can you tell us the story? Tell us that story about when you got kicked out of either your first leadership school, but eventually ended up graduating from the school with the most demerits in the history of the NCO Academy in Fort Bliss, Texas. So there's that story. And so, like I said, the reader is going to be taken on a ride that they've probably never experienced.
Oh, that's so fun. And like you said at the beginning, I think all of our lives are a bit meandering. Very few people, have a very clear path from the very beginning. And most people, as they get into their careers, for example, end up doing a whole variety of things, often very different than what they had initially planned for, or even went to school for. That's a pretty kind of typical story that I hear over and over again. And it sounds like it applies definitely to you.
Oh yeah.
Perhaps even in more extreme ways for your experiences. It's a story of resilience. It's a story, a reminder to all of us that even when things don't work out according to our best laid plans, that ultimately they can turn out even better if we're willing to learn and adapt to the situations we find ourselves in. If we get frustrated, it's okay to be a little angry and be frustrated, to have those negative emotions when bad things happen. But if we get stuck in those negative emotions and we ruminate, and rather than learning, growing, moving on, we just are stuck there, then those types of experiences become derailers and really inhibit our opportunities. But on the other hand, if we can lean into and be a little bit more agile around those types of disruptions that happen in our lives, then we can see, the silver lining, so to speak. We can see what there is to learn from this hard experience, and we can pivot. And it's been my experience as I've meandered through a whole bunch of different things that oftentimes what ends up happening, if I leave my options open and I try to develop and build meaningful relationships with people, that over time things end up working out better than I'd planned. And I'm a pretty meticulous guy. Like, I plan a lot. I plan, I prepare. I don't like to leave things up to chance, and I prepare to a point, and then I just kind of let things happen. And I find that usually, almost always, what ends up happening isn't what I planned for, and it's usually better. And so I think just being a little bit flexible is really important as we navigate. One of the things I know you talk about in the book is how your son also served in your own company. That's got to be a bit unique. Maybe tell us a little bit about that and how that impacted your leadership during combat deployment.
Well, he was 10 when his mom passed away, and so there were some tentative years there where I was my major concern was with the three children that I had with my first wife, Randy, and so he there was some real struggle there in his teen years, but at about the midpoint of his junior year, he said, I want to join the Guard. Of course, he'd grown up coming up to the hangar where I worked full time, and climbing around the helicopters, climbing on the Apaches, on the Blackhawks, and we had a number of other airframes there. And so, he just said, I want to follow in your footsteps. And so I just said, well, you feel this way during the middle part of your senior year, let me know. And so he did. And so, we got him off to basic training after a senior year. And so, and at that point in my career, about the time that my first wife passed away, that's kind of, when I kind of came back, I took a hiatus from the Guard for several months and came back, and it just seemed like at that point my career just took off, and so we got tapped for a combat deployment, and so he went off to basic while we were getting ready for the deployment, and then we were in Fort Hood, Texas, doing mobilization training, and that can take like a month to get ready to go into a combat zone, and so he finished up his school while we were in Texas, and the next thing I knew, I got a note saying, you're going to go pick up several soldiers, and he was one of them. And so it was both a sense of pride of having him, get through basic, graduate from. He became an Apache mechanic, and then catch us on the tail end of our stay in Fort Hood, Texas. But it was also nerve wracking because my son's there, and it's one of the things I talked to my soldiers about was just get used to a level of uncertainty going into a combat zone, and so there's all the protections in the world for those of us in aviation and the job that we do supporting other units with the Apache. And so, we got into the country and got set up and started, maintaining and Apaches and flying missions and stuff. And so it was comforting on one level to have my son there, but also kind of uncomfortable on another level because you didn't know what was some of the dangers out there for being in a combat zone. And so he, the one good thing about the whole deployment was that you work 7 days a week, 12 on, 12 off. And we took a whole bunch of very green mechanics and we brought back some incredibly experienced mechanics. And there's really, at this point in his life, he'll be 30 in April. There's really nothing he can't fix. I mean, I'm going to him now, asking him questions about my cars, because he came back and continued on and has been a mechanic and so he far surpassed me a long time ago when it came to, being a mechanic and knowing how to fix things and knowing, what makes things, what breaks things and what fixes them and stuff. And so, he's a great resource for me now, to ask questions of, have you ever messed with this and so, it gave him tremendous life experience.
Yeah. Well, that is fantastic. Brad, it has been a really fun conversation. I know at the time I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute. There's a lot more that could be said, but that's the beauty of having a book that people can pick up and check out the stories and learn the principles that you share throughout and apply. And, think about how we can apply these into our lives, into our workplace experiences, our own leadership philosophy. As we start to wrap things up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you and find out more about your work, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Well, they can connect with me on Instagram at author Bradley Jones, all one word. I'm on Twitter, author BP Jones, and then Facebook is Bradley.Jones.3914. And so I'm out there on social media, try to post, positive things. And I've got some great content with, snippets of my book, also some of the Apache photos and videos that I've taken over the years. I'm putting those up on social media. And so, and like I said, my book is basically an American story. It's kind of a, not really appropriate, for me, but kind of almost a rags to riches kind of story. Young man starts off in life, and kind of directionless, and then, goes into the military and then hits a stride at some point along the way, has some tremendous ups and downs. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is that, when the reader, finishes the book, I guarantee you they will say that they have been on a ride. That was moving, poignant, and unforgettable.
I love it. Thank you, Brad. It has just been a real pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Brad can do for you. Check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page. And please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.